The smell of industrial cleaner clung to me uniform as I pushed my mop bucket through the gleaming halls of Morgan Industries. It was past midnight, and the 47th floor home to the executive offices was empty except for me, just how young Maxwell Morgan liked it. "Hey, janitor." His voice echoed through the corridor, making me grip my mop handle tighter. Maxwell, the CEO's only son. And Ira, a parent, stood in his office doorway, designer suit still pristine. Despite the late hour, my coffee spilled. Clean it up. I knew it wasn't an accident. The puddle of cold coffee spread across his floor in a deliberate pattern. He'd poured it. They're waiting for me to arrive, just like yesterday and the day before. "Right away, Mr. Morgan," I replied quietly, keeping my eyes down as I'd learned to do. At 32, I was 5 years older than Maxwell. But in his eyes, I was nothing more than the dirt. He expected me to clean. You know, He smirked, watching me get down on my knees with my cleaning cloth. Dad wanted tall place, all the janitors with a cleaning service, but I convinced him to keep you on. So entertaining. I focused on my work, remembering the advanced economics degree hanging on my wall at home. The years I'd spent analyzing Morgan Industries, every move, every weakness, every vulnerability. Maxwell had no idea that while I cleaned his office each night, I was also memorizing every document he carelessly left in view, every conversation he had on speakerphone, every password he typed. While I emptied his trash, still silent, he walked around me deliberately, stepping in my just cleaned floor. That's right. Know your place in the basement with the rest of the garbage. If he had bothered to really look at me, he might have noticed that my uniform was tailored. Not the cheap polyester the other janitors wore. He might have wondered why someone with callous-free hands chose to push a mop. But Maxwell Morgan never really looked at the help. "Oh, by the way," headed returning to his desk, "the bathroom needs attention. I may have missed the target." His laugh followed me as I pushed my cart toward the executive washroom. What Maxwell didn't know was that in my other life, my real life, I was Alexander Chin, silent owner of Vertex Capital, a private equity firm that had spent the last 3 years systematically acquiring Morgan Industries' debt. Every crude joke, every spilled coffee, every deliberate mess he made just added to my resolve. The bathroom was a disaster, of course. Maxwell had outdone himself tonight as I cleaned. I thought about the meeting I had attended this morning. Before donning my janitor's uniform, Morgan Industries was in trouble, deeper trouble than even their board of directors knew. Their Asia expansion had failed spectacularly. Their new product line was hemorrhaging money, and their stock was quietly being shorted by traders who smelled blood. Only my company, Vertex Capital, could save them. Now, not that they knew that yet. Still here. Maxwell's voice startled me. He stood in the bathroom doorway, watching me scrub with undisguised glee. "You know, we're having a board meeting tomorrow. Very important people attending. Make sure everything's spotless." He emptied his coffee cup into the freshly cleaned sink. Oops, I had to admire his timing. The meeting he mentioned was the one where Morgan Industries would learn their fate, where they would discover that their last hope for survival rested with a mysterious investor they'd never met. "Yes, Mr. Morgan," I replied, starting over with the sink. "I'll take care of it. You do that." He checked his reflection, adjusting his expensive tie. "It's all you're good for, right? Cleaning up after your betters." If he had checked the company's recent financial filings more carefully, instead of relying on his father's aging advisors, he might have noticed the pattern of debt acquisition. He had attended more meetings instead of spending afternoons at his private club. He might have heard whispers about the quiet power moves being made by Vert X Capital, but Maxwell Morgan had never needed to look closely at anything. He had been born into power, nursed on privilege, raised to believe that his name alone made him untouchable. If finished cleaning the bathroom, making it shine tomorrow, this same bathroom would be used by the board members during their emergency session. They would see their own pale reflections in the mirrors as they realized how completely their company had been outmaneuvered. "All clean, Mr. Morgan," I announced, gathering my supplies. He barely glanced up from his phone. "Whatever, just remember your place." Down in the basement with the rest of the trash, I pushed my cart toward the service elevator, allowing myself a small smile. Maxwell had no idea that while he was making messes for me to clean, I had been orchestrating the most hostile takeover. Wall Street would see this decade in my pocket. My phone buzzed a message from the final pieces were in place. Morgan Industries board would arrive tomorrow to find their company effectively belonged to me. Every cruel word, every deliberate spill, every moment of humiliation had been leading to this. In the basement, I changed out of my janitor's uniform into a hand-tailored suit that cost more than Maxwell's monthly salary. My real office, located in an unmarked building across town, was waiting for me. There another set of papers needed my attention. Termination. Notices for tomorrow, starting with Maxwell Morgan. Sometimes the best revenge isn't served cold. Sometimes it's served with a mop and bucket, disguised as a janitor silently building an empire, while your enemies laugh at your apparent misfortune. I took one last look at my janitor's uniform before locking it away for 3 years. It had been my disguise, my cover, my way of moving invisibly through the halls of power at Morgan Industries. Tomorrow I would walk through those same halls, not as a janitor, but as the owner, and Maxwell Morgan would finally learn that he should have looked more closely at and he ordered to clean his messes. The next morning, Morgan Industries headquarters buzzed with nervous energy board members, arrived in expensive cars, their faces tight with concern. They had no idea that their emergency meeting would be even more dramatic than they anticipated. I arrived early, not as a janitor this time, but as Alexander Chin, CEO of Vertex Capital. My assistant had arranged for me to use a small conference room on the 45th floor, just below the executive level, where I had spent so many nights cleaning. Maxwell's voice carried down the hallway as he greeted board members. "Don't worry. Everything's under control. Dad's got it handled." He sounded confident, arrogant. Even I checked my watch. In exactly 1 hour, that confidence would shatter. My phone buzzed with a message from my CFO. "Set every debt instrument, every leveraged position. We own it all. They're completely at our mercy." I straightened my Brian suit, worth more than 6 months of Maxwell's salary, and reviewed the documents one last time. 3 years of careful planning had led to this moment. While Maxwell had been making messes for me too, Cleaner I had been systematically acquiring his family's company. The board meeting started at 9 a.m. Sharp through my contacts, I knew exactly how it would begin. Old Man Morgan would try to reassure everyone about the company's stability. Maxwell would make grandiose promises about future growth. The board would pretend to believe them. At 9:30, my assistant would deliver the news that would change everything. I stood by the window, watching the city below. Somewhere down there, the other janitors were starting their morning shifts, pushing their carts through empty offices. They had been kind to me during my undercover work, sharing their coffee and stories. I had already arranged for each of them to receive a generous severance package and job placement assistance. Once I took over at exactly 9:30, I heard the first signs of chaos erupting from the floor above raised voices, a chair scraping back, footsteps, pacing right on schedule. My phone rang Maxwell's secretary, her voice trembling. "Mr. Chin, the board. Request your immediate presence in the main conference room." "I'll be right up," I replied calmly. The elevator ride to the 47th floor felt different this time. No cart, no mop, no smell of cleanings, supplies just me, a briefcase full of termination papers, and 3 years of pent-up satisfaction. When I stepped into the boardroom, the scene was exactly as I'd imagined. Old Man Morgan stood at the head of the table, his face ashen. Board members sat in stunned silence, papers strewn before them, and Maxwell was pacing, his perfect hair disheveled, his expensive tie loosened. "Who the hell is Alexander Chin?" he demanded as I entered. "And how does he own our entire debt portfolio?" "That would be me," I said quietly. Maxwell spun around, his eyes widening as he recognized me. The color drained from his face. "You're the janitor, actually?" I set my briefcase on the table. "I'm the man who just bought your company." "Old man," Morgan stepped forward, trying to maintain his dignity. "Now see here, young man." I held up my hand, silencing him. 3 years ago, I started buying your debt through various shell companies while your son was making messes. For me to clean, I was analyzing your books, your contracts, your weaknesses. Every night, as I emptied his trash, I learned more about how vulnerable you really were. The board members exchanged glances. One of them, Mrs. Richardson, leaned forward. "Why go to such lengths? Why work as a janitor?" It turned to Maxwell, who had collapsed into chair. "Because your error apparent." Hare needed a lesson in humility every night. He made my job harder than it needed to be. Every night he reminded me to stay in the basement where I belonged. Now he's going to learn what the basement actually feels like. "You can't do this," Maxwell whispered, but his voice lacked conviction. I opened my briefcase and began distributing papers. "Shlee, I can, as of this morning, Vertex Capital owns 78% of Morgan Industries' debt. You need an immediate capital injection of $300 million to avoid bankruptcy. I'm prepared to provide that funding with certain conditions." Old Man Morgan Chans shook as he read the terms. "These conditions, you're demanding full control, complete restructuring," I corrected, "starting with the executive team." Maxwell jumped up. "Dad, you can't let him sit down." "Maxwell," his father snapped, "you're reckless spending and failed projects are partly why we're in this mess." I pulled out one final document, a termination notice with Maxwell's name on it. "Your first task in the mailroom starts Monday. That is, if you want to keep any connection to this company at all." The boardroom erupted. In chaos, board members argued. Maxwell shouted. His father tried to maintain order through it all. I stood calmly, remembering every spilled coffee, every crude joke, every deliberate mess I had cleaned up. "This is revenge," Maxwell spat. "Pure revenge." "No," I corrected him, "this is business." But the fact that it feels like revenge, that's just a bonus over the next hour. The reality of their situations, Ankin Morgan Industries was mine. Their only choice was to accept my terms or face immediate bankruptcy. One by one, the board members signed the agreements. Maxwell stormed out before the signing was complete. I heard him in his office, throwing things, yelling at his secretary to get his lawyer on the phone. But there was nothing any lawyer could do. I had orchestrated everything. Perfectly legal, perfectly ruthless. As the shell-shocked board members filed out, Old Man Morgan Lingard, you didn't have to work as a janitor to do this, he said quietly. Why I straightened the papers on Thedable. Because your son needed to learn that the people he looks down on might be looking right back, that the man hoarders, to clean his mess, might be taking notes that true power isn't inherited, is earned. That afternoon, I moved into the Co's office, the same office I had cleaned countless times. Maxwell's personal items were already packed, in boxes waiting by the service elevator. A fitting exit route for the former heir apparent my assistant brought in the company-wide announcement about the change in ownership. As employees gathered in the lobby to hear the news, I spotted familiar faces, the security guards who had greeted me each night, the maintenance staff who had shared their break room with me, the cleaning crew who'd never treated me as beneath them. Effective immediately, I began my announcement. Morgan Industries will undergo a complete restructuring. Every employee will be evaluated based on their merit, their work ethic, and their treatment of others, regardless of their position in the back of the crowd. I spotted Maxwell, still in his expensive suit, looking lost. Our eyes met, and I saw. The moment he finally understood, every coffee he had spilled, every mess he had made, every cruel word he had spoken, they had all led to this moment. Some of you knew me as the night janitor. I continued. Others never noticed me at all. That's about to change. Starting today, this company will operate under new principles. Respect will be earned, not inherited. Success will be based on merit, not name. And everyone will clean up their own coffee spills. The crowd's reaction was mixed, shocked disbelief, and from the service staff, barely concealed satisfaction. Maxwell had disappeared, probably to clean out his office. Tomorrow, he would find his new uniform waiting in the basement locker room. If he decided to accept the mailroom position at all that evening as the sun set over the city, I stood in my new office, that office I had once cleaned every night. On my desk sat a familiar coffee cup, the one Maxwell had used to make his deliberate spills. I had kept it as a reminder. My phone buzzed with messages from Wall Street. The news of Morgan Industries' takeover was making waves. Analysts were calling it the most brilliant hostile takeover in decades. Nobody had seen it coming. Nobody except the janitor who had watched it all unfold one clean floor at a time, picked up Maxwell's old coffee cup and dropped it in the trash where it belonged. Sometimes the best way to clean house isn't with a mop and bucket. It's with patience, strategy, and the willingness to be underestimated. The next morning, I arrived early to find Maxwell waiting in the lobby, wearing the company's mailroom uniform. It didn't fit him quite right, much like his new reality. Your cart's in the basement, it told him as I passed. And Maxwell, try not to spill anything. The janitors have better things to do than clean up your messes. His face wrined, but he said nothing. He had finally learned what I'd known all along, that true power isn't about where you start, but how carefully you plan where you'll finish. And sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one with the mop.